Hey yo, LAZ man, I'm cooking up a crazy new album right now. You heard? I want y'all opinion on which designer I should use to do my cover. You heard? Cause you know I always keep a fire cover. The bars on this album, crazy. The beats on this album, crazy. If you want to be a part of a masterpiece, send me an email at thegenpopllc@gmail.com. Hey yo, LAZ, make sure you run over and subscribe to my bros over there at InSource TV. They got a lot of fire exclusive interviews. Yersk. Check they new joint with Mr. Full Moon. It's called Tales of a Killer Priest. Exclusive stories you never heard in your life. Yersk. Leave some comments. Tell them Z-Man Suicide Polo with the Ski Man sent you. Links in the description and in the comment section. Make sure you check my bro Shrine B out of Jersey. You heard? Follow him on that gram. And go check them bangers out at repyourset.net. You heard? Also check that album from me and Shrine B, Interstate Heavyweights.
Alright, first of all, I just want to continue to say thank you, to everybody that's been donating to the Truth Parker Fund. Every contribution y'all made has been a blessing in a major, major way. And I can't even really begin to show y'all how appreciative I am for all that kind of support. It definitely means a lot to me. So, if you haven't already or you would like to, feel like you got a single dollar to spare, go ahead and hit up the Cash App, Truth Parker Fund, all one word, no spaces. Y'all continue to bless me, and I'm going to definitely return the favor, continue to bless you with these real-life drama stories and content that you ain't going to find nowhere else. You understand what I'm saying? With that being said, though, it's another one of them stories, man, that's kind of heart-wrenching. You know what I mean? Another one of those stories that I ain't really too fond of talking about too much, but, as I mentioned to you before, if I'm going to tell this type of story, I'm going to be sure to bring it to you, lads, because I ain't going to do this shit with nobody else. You understand what I'm saying? And y'all ain't going to get this type of shit nowhere else either. That's a fact. Anyway, like I said, this is another wild-ass story, man, about this dude named Ricky Gray and his nephew named Ray Dandridge. Basically went on a killing spree in Richmond back in 2006. Now, I can remember this shit vividly, like it happened last week. And the reason why, it stands out so clear in my mind is because it took place on January 1st, New Year's Day. You know what I'm saying? That was the first murders of that year. And they wound up killing like 7 people in the span of just 1 week before getting caught. And then all the details started unfolding, and it had got discovered that, they had also been linked to the killings of 2 other people in Pennsylvania. And then almost killing a 3rd person in Arlington, Virginia. And that was like right before they flipped out in Richmond. So altogether, it was like 9 people that they killed, and the 10th victim wound up surviving. So ultimately, Ricky, he wound up being convicted of multiple capital murders, got the death penalty for it. And he got executed by the state in 2017. He was actually the second to last person to get executed by the state before they abolished the death penalty in 2019. I think the dude, John Muhammad, the DC sniper guy, he was killed a couple years prior to that. And then I seem to remember a little female or something that got executed somewhere around that time too. I'm not sure if she was the last person to die or whether it was somebody else, but anyway, the dude Ray, who happened to be Ricky's nephew, he wound up taking a plea deal, to some of the murders, and he avoided the death penalty, but he got a life sentence without the possibility of parole. And he's actually still in prison to this day, out here in a spot called Sussex. He ain't gonna never see the streets again. But what's so wild about his case specifically, and what makes it so hard, and difficult for me to comprehend about the role that he played in all of it, is the fact that he had just come home from doing a 10-year bid on some armed robbery shit, like two months prior to him and his uncle Ricky wilding out. So, just so y'all understand, they was both blood related, okay, uncle and nephew, but they was the same age. They was both 28. They birthdays really just so happened to be a couple days apart. They was basically the same age as me at that time. So, however that happened, Ricky was dude's uncle. And then through the course of the trials, Ray's defense lawyers, he tried to paint the picture of him being like borderline mentally challenged or handicapped or some shit like that. And he tried to make Ricky out to basically be the leader and the mastermind of all the shit that they did together. As if he was trying to make his nephew commit these crimes with him. So I guess basically trying to minimize dude's role in what they did, as if he shouldn't be held responsible for his actions. That's basically how he wound up getting the life sentence, and Ricky wound up getting the death penalty. So, I guess it worked out in his favor, or on his behalf, so to speak. The truth is, though, dude always been a maniac, for real. You know what I mean? He always been a real devious, cutthroat type of nigga that would probably follow along with anything, that sounded or looked like a good plan, no matter how crazy the shit was. Especially when he was on the PCP, when they was both on that shit heavy. I said that to say, he ain't really do too much thinking for himself. You understand what I'm saying? So, I guess in the long run, I'm not really surprised that he wound up playing the part he did and all of what happened. Now, it's a lot to this story, alright? So I'm going to try and lay it all out the best way I can for you. So, if I happen to mention anything, that sounds a little confusing or whatever, just let me know, and I'll try to clarify whatever point it is that I'm trying to convey to you. But the joint was real high profile and heinous, and sad. It's really a fucked up situation for real. But this is how it all went down. So, in 2005, the dude, Ricky Gray, he had not too long just come home from doing a prison bid, probably about a year or so. And shortly after that, he wound up marrying his little girlfriend and moving into her place, which happened to be a home that was owned by her family out in Washington, Pennsylvania. Now, for anybody that's curious, that's just a little suburb right outside of Pittsburgh. And they was living together for a few months out there. And supposedly had a real toxic relationship with one another. Always arguing, fighting, and fussing, shit like that. It was definitely a lot of physical altercations between them. And they was both on all types of drugs, too. So, I guess you could probably imagine the type of shit that they be fighting about. Shorty's parents, they would actually go on record after the fact to say that it was a real abusive relationship between the two of them for the whole time that they was together. Now, the dude, Ray Dandridge, who, like I mentioned, was Ricky's nephew, he got released from prison in the end of October that same year, 2005. And Ricky, he wound up inviting him to come stay with him and his wife out in Pennsylvania until he could get on his feet. I suppose he ain't really had nowhere else to go at that time. So I guess you could imagine, Shorty girl, Ricky's wife, she wasn't too happy about the situation at all. And it caused even more conflict and friction between her and Ricky. And it's just my assumption that Ray, he probably became a little frustrated, and resentful himself towards her, because of the hard times he was giving his uncle about him even being there. So, roughly about a week later, after his release, Shorty girl's dead body is found, beaten to a bloody pulp. She's laying in a shallow grave on the side of the road, somewhere near where they live in Pennsylvania. And what's crazy about that is, both Ricky and Ray got picked up, interviewed and questioned by the police about it. But they wasn't labeled as any suspects at that time, so they wasn't charged with nothing. And Shorty's death wound up just getting ruled as a drug overdose. And it won't be till like weeks later, when all these other murders come to light, that the police finally get a confession and find out what happened to his wife. But I'm gonna get to that in a second though. So here it is, about a year or so from him getting released, 6 months after being married, 1 week after his nephew comes home from prison, his wife turns up dead. So the following week after that, Shorty girl parents, they evict them both from the property. So Ray, he winds up moving to West Philly with his father, and Ricky, he winds up moving in with his grandmother somewhere in Arlington, Virginia. And then on Christmas Day, Ray, he winds up traveling down from Philly to meet up with his uncle in VA. And from there, all hell would break loose. So apparently, they wind up catching some random guy in front of his house and attacking him. And it's not clear whether or not this was an attempted robbery or what was really going on there, but the dude is beaten up real bad. He's stabbed multiple times in the neck, in the chest, and the arms, and he actually wound up spending the next 2 weeks in a coma, which after coming out of the coma, he had permanently lost the use of one of his arms. But he was lucky to be alive, though. That won't be the case for these next victims in this crazy-ass warpath for these niggas. Now, it's also a fact, too, that these guys was both getting high off of PCP and some other stuff for like 3 or 4 days straight. And I'd like to assume that they was really probably on a mission to stay high and get even higher, and was trying to find some money to make that happen, because even though, it's absolutely no justifying the shit that they did next, somehow, some way, I just don't want to believe these dudes' hearts is just that cold and ruthless, and that they intentionally and purposefully carried out the shit that they did in the same mind frame. You got to be like a real sick individual to do the type of shit they did. So as it turns out, they wind up traveling to Richmond. That's where they meet up with this girl named Ashley, who just so happened to be a girlfriend of Ray's. Now, it's really not clear, how well Ray knew the girl, because remember, it's only been 2 months since he came home from doing 10 years. And she also winds up getting killed later on. So how they met, is going to forever remain a mystery. Anyhow, however they knew each other, Shorty was down with the lick, and apparently she had already had some houses picked out that she thought was going to be some good spots for them to rob and find some valuable merchandise to steal. And I guess, turn around and sell it or whatever. Now, maybe she knew already, maybe she didn't, but the first house that she picked out happened to belong to this pretty well-known, affluent white family, who the husband happened to be the lead singer and guitarist of this popular local rock band called the House of Freaks, and whose wife, she happened to be the sister of a well-known Hollywood actor. Now, I ain't gonna reveal his name or nothing, but she was also the co-owner of a real popular toy store in Richmond's Carytown shopping district area. Now, for those that's not familiar, Carytown is like the white folks' downtown area. It's a long-ass strip full of clothing and antique stores, little shops of all kinds, little restaurants, bars, all kind of shit, really. And it stays packed with customers all day and night, especially during this time, which would have been the holiday season. And even though, everybody travels down there at some point or another, it's really considered to be like prime real estate for retail stores. And I know that personally because I tried to open a couple businesses out there before, and the rents for the buildings and the storefronts was just astronomical and through the roof. So I never wound up doing it, but I know the area well. Everybody does. So anyway, it's mid-afternoon, alright, January 1st. Ashley takes the niggas Ricky and Ray to this house that she's been scoping out, and she's told to wait outside in the car while they make their way inside. Now this is where it gets real crazy and all hell breaks loose. So however they wind up getting in the house undetected, they come to realize that the whole family was still there, and they wind up coming face to face. So, they quickly overpower everybody in there. The mom, the dad, and a little 4-year-old girl. And there's actually another little 9-year-old girl, but she's off at a friend's house at the moment, hadn't really returned home yet. So Ricky winds up taking the family down to the basement and tying them all up with electrical cords and duct tape, while Ray is upstairs ransacking the house, trying to collect whatever he could get his hands on that seems valuable. So in the midst of all of this, the little 9-year-old, she's returning home now and being brought back to the house by her friend's mother, who happens to walk her up to the front door. Now realizing this, Ricky unties the mother and walks her back upstairs to allow her to retrieve her daughter. Now he must have warned her, and persuaded her not to be acting all suspicious and shit as to give off any warning signals, as to what was actually taking place inside the house. Because it's obvious that the other parent, she didn't notice anything alarming. No red flags or nothing like that. She did wind up saying after the fact that she noticed the lady did seem kind of pale, but she wasn't really alarmed as to anything being wrong. So she just turned around and left, and then Ricky took the mom and the 9-year-old back down to the basement and tied them both back up. And this time he put plastic bags over everybody's head, and he bound it with duct tape, as if he was trying to suffocate them all. I guess that ain't really work out the way that he thought it would, so he just started smashing them all in their heads with a claw hammer numerous times, and then stabbing them in their backs and chests and slitting their throats with this big-ass kitchen knife, and watching over them as they all squirmed on the floor, gasping for air, trying to take their last breaths. So picture this nigga, he's standing there hovering right on top of them, listening to them little babies crying and dying. And the knife he used was so big, man, that when the little 4-year-old got stabbed in the back, the blade wound up puncturing her lungs, came straight through her chest. Real sick-ass nigga, man, by any standards. So, anyway, by this time, I guess Ray had found any and everything in the house that he considered to be of value, and he wound up joining Ricky in the basement. And then it's at that moment that they decided they was going to burn and torch the house, and try to destroy as much as they could of the crime scene and any other evidence of them even being there. So they wound up gathering up a few bottles of wine that they found, and they knocked over this little art easel or whatever with all kind of paints and other little flammable things on it. And they started pouring the wine all out over everything and setting a fire before walking out the house and back to the car where Ashley was still outside waiting on them. Now, unfortunately for them, though, before the house could go completely up in flames, it was a neighbor who also happened to be the drummer in that same House of Freaks band. He noticed the smoke and the flames coming from his partner's house, and he called 911. So when the fire department and the authorities came out to stop the blaze, that's when they noticed the gruesome discovery and found the murdered family in their own basement. You know what I mean? That shit was terrible as hell, but this story is far from over. That's just the beginning of it all. So now it's January 3rd, 2 days later. They come up on another house out on Hollywood Drive in Chesterfield that Ashley must have scoped out as well. Now, if you don't know, Chesterfield is like another one of the surrounding bordering counties of Richmond. And there's a lot of big homes and stuff like that out there. So it was an older couple that was living out there, and the trio, Ricky, Ray, and Ashley, they wound up gaining entry to that house by, somehow pretending to be looking for directions or whatever. And they beat the old man over the head with something solid. I'm not quite sure what it was. And then they pinned the old lady down to the floor so where she couldn't move. And then they started taking items. I think they got like $800 in cash, a laptop, a television, some jewelry, and a few other things before the old man was able to persuade him to not tie him up and hurt him any further, because his wife was already disabled. She needed him to even help her get around. So that couple got lucky. The group left them and didn't cause them any more harm. Now this is where it gets even more interesting, though. So by now, it's been a few days. Ricky and Ray, they hanging out with the chick Ashley. They getting high and all of that, doing whatever it is they do. And they trying to sell off some of the stuff that they've been stealing. And, acting as if everything is normal or whatever. And apparently Ashley, she's been introducing them to people that she knows as her boyfriends. Now, I don't think at this point Ricky or Ray thought that was a good idea. And they probably was getting a little paranoid with all the talk that was going around about the well-known family being killed in their basement. And I'm not even sure, because it was never made clear if at this point the chick Ashley was even aware of them killing those people while she was waiting outside. It's just hard to say at this point. But apparently, Rick and Ray, they must have started thinking that she was letting too many people know, that they had been involved with robbing several houses in that area. So on January 6th, the police wound up getting a call from what they would describe as a concerned Chesterfield resident, who happened to be the parent of one of Ashley's friends, who stated that she had become concerned and suspicious for whatever reasons about Ashley's safety and her hanging with these older guys that she brought to her house and was introducing them as her boyfriends and trying to sell stolen merchandise. She wound up stating to the police that she thought that they might have had something to do with the murders of that family. So the detectives, they wound up making a trip to the lady's house. You know what I'm saying? And she showed them a couple of the items that she bought from Ashley and the men. And lo and behold, they was identified as belonging to that murdered family. So, immediately the detectives, they get a squad together, and they try to go raid this residence on East Broad Rock Road, That's where Ashley lived with her parents at the time. Now what's crazy is when they get there, and proceed to knock the doors down to make entry to the house, they discover that the house already been ransacked, and it was 3 more dead bodies in there. One of 21-year-old Ashley, one of her mother, and her stepdad, all gagged and bound, tied up with plastic bags sealed over their heads with layers and layers of duct tape around their faces, and their throats cut wide open. All 3 of them had been suffocated, due to the amount of tape that was wrapped around them. And it was a bloody mess, man. Talking about some wild ass shit out of a horror movie. So, as it turns out, the very next morning, both Ricky and Ray, they get arrested back in West Philly at Ray's father's house. Now, I'm not too clear on all the details, how they got found so fast. But what I do know is that not long into the police interrogation, Ray wound up confessing to killing Ashley and her family. And Ricky, he wound up giving a 3-page detailed account of how he slaughtered the other family in their basement with the big kitchen knife and claw hammer, and then setting the house on fire. He also wound up confessing to beating his wife to death while Ray held her down. And then he also confessed to that wild-ass attack on the dude that they beat into a coma, but wound up surviving. So, ultimately, Ricky got charged with 5 counts of capital murder, and Ray was charged with 3. And they wound up both acknowledging that, Ashley participated in the first family's murders, where she played the role of a lookout and stayed in the car. And that she also played the role in the Chesterfield robbery of the older couple, too. But, what's even crazier about all this shit is, come to find out, it was actually Ashley's idea to rob her own parents' house. According to both Ricky and Ray, both their testimonies and confession accounts, supposedly part of the plan was for her to play the victim and be willingly tied up and gagged alongside her mom and her stepdad, so it wouldn't seem as though she set the whole thing up and had something to do with it. I guess Ricky and Ray, they just wound up going a little too far, and the original plan just went left. And either that, or they just got tired of her, and planned to kill her all along. But however it went down, or whatever went wrong, Ashley, who at one point, was a willing participant in all the madness, was now a murder victim herself at the very same hands of the same guys that she was helping and happened to call her boyfriends. And they wound up leaving the scene in her parents' car. And Ashley was found still wearing the wedding bands of the husband and wife who got slaughtered first when they found her body in the house next to her parents. So as it turns out, when the trial started, initially both Ricky and Ray pled not guilty, and tried to put up defenses. Ricky's being that his usage of PCP and other drugs kind of paired with his troubled childhood, was filled with physical and sexual abuse or whatever, was the cause of his actions. And Ray's defense, like I said earlier, was that he was somewhat mentally challenged or impaired, and was under his uncle's power, felt he needed to do what he was told and go along with all the plans or wind up being a victim himself. But neither one of those defenses worked, though. And get this, it ain't even stopped there, because by the end of that same year, Ricky would also get charged with the murder of another female companion of his that was in Culpeper County, Pennsylvania. This was like right before his wife's murder. She happened to be a 37-year-old mother of 3 that was found shot and hanged by an electrical cord in her own basement that also happened to be set on fire. This nigga was ruthless, man. So they both wound up being tried separately. Ray, he wound up taking a plea deal at the very last moment and getting sentenced to life without parole, being sent off to a maximum security state prison, never to be heard from again. As for Ricky Gray, well, after 4 days of trial and 3 hours of deliberations, the jury would find him guilty on all counts, and sentencing him to death. And he wound up spending the rest of his years on death row. And then after all his appeals and motions and clemency attempts, made his way through the courts and all that, and he was finally denied by the governor, he wound up being executed by lethal injection in January of 2017. which happened to be almost 11 years to the day of him committing the actual crimes. So, look, I mean, I'm sure you could probably tell by the story I just told that these two niggas, Ricky and Ray, was on some other shit. You know what I mean? A whole nother level of crazy and criminality, way beyond the average and above average levels of normal violence, for real. You know, I guess you just got some people in this world that are clearly just pure freaking evil, you know, for whatever reasons. You understand what I'm saying? I know, like, heavy drug use and abuse, you know, can always play a big part, you know, in people's decision-making processes, but I'll never relate to that, because I ain't never did drugs of any kind, you know, other than smoke some weed or whatever. So I wouldn't really know anything about anything else. What I can tell you, though, is, and anybody else who's done it can tell you, too, that it takes a certain state of being and mindset to really intentionally take somebody's life. You know, and I'm not saying all, but in a lot of cases, you know, they wind up really just being casualties of war, circumstance. Sad but true, you know, and I get that totally. I can relate in a big way. But, you know, to intentionally snatch the lives of innocent children, that's just like a level of madness that I ain't gonna never understand or fully comprehend. You know, and I don't feel no kind of remorse or sorrow for nobody that engages in that type of violence towards kids. You know, I feel like you deserve whatever's coming to you, point blank. And that really goes for anybody that messes with kids. You know, I'm talking about child abusers, child molesters, kidnappers, sex traffickers, and whoever else falls in that category. You know, I feel like you should all get hung upside down by your balls and tortured slow and relentlessly for weeks on end. You know, I hope y'all niggas die a real slow, painful death. And that's coming from the heart, man, real talk. Aside from that, though, I do want to make one more point. You know, and I hate to play the race cards and all that, but sometimes it's just clear as day that the disparity between us blacks and people of color compared to our white counterparts is still the same as it ever was in all facets of life, especially when we're talking about the justice system and the way we receive and acknowledge whenever tragedy strikes. And I ain't hating on nobody by any means. You know, I'm just acknowledging facts and bringing them to the light, just in case these things tend to go over your head. I say that because, you know, the last story I told about Christopher Pop Goins, you know, detailed how a poor black family, you know, parents on drugs, living in the crime-filled projects, kids and all, you know, was totally annihilated in the worst fashion in one of the most heinous crimes in Richmond's history. You know, and this story right here, it also speaks on a black and a white family, you know, who was also executed in the most horrible way. And all of it's sad as hell, you know, and heartbreaking, especially because it involves small and young children. And personally, you know, I just can't rate one over the other. My point is, though, I guess because this was an affluent, wealthy white family and had ties to famous people in Hollywood, you know, and was well known in the community, that they deserve some type of extra special kind of recognition and dedications. I say that because in 2007, you know, which was the following year, the Richmond newspaper named that family Richmonders of the Year. You know, and then they've had annual events and fundraisers and scholarships given out and named after them too. The city of Richmond also actually just dedicated a newly built footbridge in Forest Hill Park in honor of that family and actually named it their family name. You know, there have been songs written and performed by local bands dedicated to them. There have even been gardens and flower beds planted out and around the city in the honor of those kids. You know, and different kinds of school programs was established at the schools that they attended in their memories. You know, what I'm getting at is they're remembered, you know, and they talked about and written about year after year. So nobody will ever forget their legacies and all that kind of stuff. Whereas nobody ever mentions or talks about the black families, you know, that lost just as much. And if I didn't do these type of stories, and if Laz ain't had this type of platform to allow him to be heard, you know, it's a good chance that a lot of folks wouldn't even know nothing about these cases, for real. And I'll only be speaking on events that take place in Virginia and Jersey, you know, but this type of shit happens everywhere, though. You know, like I said, the level of blatant disparity and disregard to me is sometimes just hard to swallow, you know, especially when it's just so blatantly put in our faces like that. The message just becomes real clear. You know, when it comes across and to say they don't care about us, like we don't even matter, like our lives are worthless. You know what I mean? And that's always evident, though. So, I'm going to always recognize that. And I'm going to speak on it every chance I get, especially when I got some listening ears that's going to take heed. You feel me? And that's all I'm going to say about that right now. All in all, I ain't got no moral to this story. I just want y'all to think about what I just said and know that we got to honor our own. Keep our loved ones and lost ones in the forefront of our memories and hold them high with love and respect. Because ain't nobody else going to do that shit for us. Anyway, man, make sure to check out my podcast, man, Truth Beyond These Walls. It's on all major music streaming platforms. Drop me a note on the gram at Truth Beyond These Walls, too. I love hearing from y'all. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to donate $1 if you can spare it on Cash App to Truth Parker Fund. All one word, no spaces. Yo, shout out to you, Laz, man. You already know how we do, bro. This your man, Truth Parker. Jersey to VA all day. Holla at your boy, man. One.
This call will be recorded and subject to monitoring.
Hey, yo, LAZ Gen Pop TV, we in the building. You heard? Comment gang, tear this up, get this algorithm nice and fluffy. You heard? If you ain't subscribed to the channel, you bugging out. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that bell so you get a notification every time I drop some new filet mignon. You heard? Z-Man Suicide Polo with the ski man running around the hood like He-Man at 3 a.m. with 3 swams looking for a dude that ran off with 3 grams. You feel what I'm saying? If you love what I'm doing on this channel, feel free to send me a donation right here. $ Gen Pop fam. You already snow removal. You heard? If you need promo out there, you want to book St. Laz for an event, interview, something like that. Now, I mean, you need some camera work done. Now, I mean, I'm a one-stop shop and I'm open 24 hours. Hit me up on Instagram at Real St. Laz. You heard? And that's a whole fact. But once again, shout out to the bro, Truth Parker, currently incarcerated in the state of Virginia for bringing us this fire. You heard? Get at me, Z-Lord.
Broadcasted live from New York City. It's the hottest channel on these YouTube streets. The best jail stories and hood stories are here. Make sure you subscribe today. LAZ.
Alright, so this is a story, man, about this group of 3 brothers who was originally from the north side of Richmond, VA, in this neighborhood called Highland Park. Now, these dudes, they would go down in infamy, as some of the most talked about, well-recognized, notorious, and violent criminals probably to ever walk the streets of Richmond. I say that because, they went on this wild, violent, and crazy, murderous killing and crime spree in the streets back in the late 70s. They was actually accused of butchering and beating to death about 12 different people in all, including this chick that was 8 months pregnant, along with her 5-year-old son. I'm talking about these dudes, they did senseless robberies, abductions, homicides, along with violent rapes, and gave out some merciless beatings. It was all a part of their terrorizing spree. And all these killings, they actually happened in like a short span of about 7 to 8 months. Not only that, though, after they finally got caught and captured and convicted, they received multiple life sentences for some of the crimes, and then they also received multiple death sentences for others. They were sent to death row. But 2 of the brothers, along with a few other inmates that was on death row, they actually managed to take over their unit and make a crazy-ass escape from what would be known as one of VA's highest security prisons at that time, called Mecklenburg Correctional. Now, they did, however, wind up getting, caught and recaptured soon after that. In the state of VA, they ain't waste no time strapping them boys to the electric chair and killing them at that point. One of the brothers, the youngest of the 3, and the only one who didn't receive the death penalty, he's actually still alive to this day. And he's serving out a life sentence for his role in all of it. Now, you already know, man, I'm going to break this whole shit down for you. So, if you're familiar with the case, cool. You're probably going to remember a lot of the details that I'm about to get into. But if not, and this is brand new to you, let me just warn you beforehand that, this is definitely one of those stories, man, that's heinous and gut-wrenching, and heartbreaking, and seemingly senseless, for the most part. The type of story that I really hate the fact that it's a true story. You know what I mean? Be that as it may, though, it's certainly a memorable part of Virginia crime history. So, it's only right that I dive into it, man, and give you the play-by-play to the best of my ability. So, with all that being said, this is a story of Linwood Earl, James Darrell Jr., and Anthony Ray, better known to the world as the Briley brothers, or the Briley boys, as they would sometimes be called. Now, let me first say this, to clear something up before I even get started, because, all this shit happened when I was a real small child, way before I even started visiting or even made my way towards Virginia. You understand what I'm saying? But, this is and always has been, one of those stories that's been passed around and talked about and debated, ever since the first time I ever stepped foot in Richmond and even started dwelling in the streets of the underworld out there. As long as I can remember, from being in the presence of some of Richmond's most well-known gangsters and big shots and big-timers, the Briley brothers' name always rang bells. Not to mention in the jails and the prison system too, especially. The brothers' names are really held in high regard, amongst the criminal population from each and every part of Virginia that you could ever possibly think of. And whether that's good or bad, everybody heard stories about the Briley boys. That's a fact. Now, let me also make mention, too, of the fact that I personally had the opportunity, to actually meet and talk to and spend time around and kick it with and work out with the youngest brother, Anthony, who actually goes by the name Bebe, when we was both housed at Powhatan State Prison. At that time, he lived only a couple cells down from mine, so we was in the very same pod together for maybe almost like a year or so. He was actually working in the inmate kitchen at the time. But as far as when he wasn't at work, we'd talk, we'd rec together, we shared the same day room, same phones, went to commissary together, shared the same showers, all that type of shit. Actually, when he was finally transferred off the compound, due to getting caught up in some small-time drug and contraband operation that was going on there, I was actually placed in his old cell. And I wound up staying in that joint for probably about another 3 or 4 years after he left. That was until I finally got transferred out of there. Now, the brothers, they was all about 2 years apart in age difference. Bebe, he was like 19, 20 years older than me. And as I said, he was the youngest brother of the three. A lot of people don't know it, but they actually got a whole nother brother, too, who's the oldest of them all, but he wasn't around, when they went on their little crime spree or whatever. He didn't take no part in it, so you don't ever really hear nothing about him. Now, Bebe, he had already been locked up for probably the better part of around 35, 36 years when I met him, which would have put him at almost 60 years old, because he was only 22 when he first got locked up. And, for a 60-year-old man, let me tell you, he was definitely in good shape. He worked out just about every day that he wasn't working in the kitchen, that is. And some days he'd even catch a little workout after work. And, I don't know if it was just because of his older age or maybe he just calmed down over time or whatever, but, I don't know what you might have expected to see or get out of this man with such a heavy reputation and long track list like he got, but Bebe was really kind of quiet type for real. And although everybody already knew who he was, he ain't really fuck with or deal with a whole lot of people. And to be honest, if you didn't already know who he was, and the story that came with him, you'd have never guessed in a million years that he was one of the infamous Briley brothers. He just didn't give off that infamous killer's vibe that you would have probably expected to get from a person with that type of history under his belt. He was like a true testament to the old cliche of a killer who moves in silence and violence. He was really kind of a nice guy, truthfully. He ain't never bothered nobody or get into nothing. I ain't never even heard him raise his voice at anybody. All he really ever wanted to do was work the kitchen most days, eat his food, exercise and lift weights, walk the yard, and play with his boys. Yeah, you heard that right. I said play with his boys. I'm talking about young homosexual men, both in and out the closet. It ain't no secret. Bebe was an old school booty bandit, for sure. That's a fact. Everybody knows that. Now, I say old school because, I'm quite sure he's been that way for a long time up until that point. You know, the thing about it is, and I'm not just singling him out because, you know, this actually goes for all the old school bandits that's still in the system these days. And trust me, it's a lot of them. You know, but times have definitely changed, though, from the days when they used to walk around with knives and shanks, raping and having their way with young niggas and taking ass in the showers. You know, nowadays, I mean, there's so many homos in prison that a lot of them just be giving it up to the bandits freely. You know, like that's their thing. I probably need to wind up doing a whole story on the whole booty bandit topic down the line sometime, just to kind of clear the air and squash the rumors and inform y'all of what really goes on nowadays behind these closed doors when it comes to all that. But this just ain't the time right now. You know, I was just making a reference to Bebe and what I know about him personally. Make no mistake about it, though. You know, booty bandit and all. At the end of the day, that nigga's a stone cold killer. Him and his brothers. Don't ever get that shit twisted. So look, as far as how the story was told to me, you know, Linwood, who was the oldest out of the three, he wound up catching his first body all by himself in January of 1971 when he was only 16 years old. Now, apparently he killed his neighbor. You know, this was an old 57-year-old lady that was outside in her yard hanging up some clothes on a clothing line out to dry. Apparently Linwood, he was home alone, you know, perched up in his bedroom window of the family's house, playing with some kind of small caliber rifle, taking target practice at different things, when he decided for whatever reason he was going to take aim at his neighbor, and he shot her while her arms was raised up while she was hanging up the clothes. So the small bullet kind of hit her in the underarm. You know, it must have traveled straight to her heart. She died right outside her house that afternoon, collapsing in the grass. Now, what's crazy about that shooting is, you know, it actually went unnoticed. You know, it wound up being at the viewing of the body when someone from the family kind of noticed a small bloody hole in the side in her side, you know, under her armpit, and asked the funeral director to re-examine the body. And it was just on that second examination that the small caliber bullet wound was found. You know, and then upon further investigation, it was determined that the trajectory and the direction of the bullet came from the Briley home. So after they searched the house, you know, they wound up finding the murder weapon. And Linwood, he soon after confessed to killing the lady. What he said was that he heard she had heart problems and she was probably going to die soon anyway. Wow, imagine that. So anyway, you know, through all the court proceedings and whatnot, Linwood's lawyer, he was able to convince the judge on that case that it was almost just an accident or whatever. And he wound up getting sentenced to only just serving a year in reform school. And that's what I call a real slap on the wrist. And 2 years later, in 1973, James Jr., who is the next oldest of the brothers, now he's at the very same age of 16, he would start serving time in a juvenile facility for shooting at police while he was getting chased down by officers in a foot chase. You know, luckily he hadn't killed anybody just yet, though, but I guess that was enough to also get him started on his life of crime. Now, it won't be till 1979 when all three of the brothers and a friend of theirs named Duncan, they would get together and they would start going on this murderous rampage and crime spree throughout the city. And it all started on March 12th, you know, when the group traveled out to Henrico, which is a neighboring suburb and sub-county of Richmond. The oldest brother, Linwood, he singled out this particular house owned by this older white couple and went and knocked on the door. He told the people that he was having some car trouble and needed to use their phone to try to call somebody for help. And when the lady that was behind the door opened it a little bit, he kind of quickly overpowered her and forced his way inside. Once inside, he was holding a couple at gunpoint, you know, and then he waited for his brother and his friend to come join him inside the house. And once they was all inside, they tied the couple up. And one of them still watched and kept the gun on him while the others started ransacking the house and grabbing up whatever valuables they could find. Now, they went from room to room, you know, one at a time through the whole house. Once they finished searching one room, they would douse the whole room and whatever was left in it with kerosene. And then they would go on to the next room. So once they finished searching the entire house, you know, they loaded up the trunk of the car with a couple TVs, some jewelry, some CB radios, a couple pistols, and some other stuff that they found. And then they lit a match, set the whole house on fire, and got the hell out of there. Now, once they was gone, though, you know, one of the couple, they managed to free himself out of his ties or whatever, and and he helped get his wife out of hers too. And they managed to escape out of that burning house just minutes before the whole place went up in flames. Now they got lucky, not only just because they escaped that fire, but really and truly because they happened to be the sole survivors of these brothers' whole 7-month rampage. Now, let me be absolutely clear too on a few things before I go any further with this story, as to not just be giving off the wrong impression of these guys like everything they did was just super heinous and uncalled for, because it was also said, and it was also rumored that some of these robberies and killings, they weren't really that senseless, and the fact that some of these crimes was committed by the group and it was somehow tied to a lot of drugs. What I mean is, aside from some of the obvious over-the-top shit they did, they was also targeting, robbing, and killing drug dealers. And that's not to say that, any of the victims actually deserve what they got. But, if you've been anywhere in the streets, man, and played that game, then you should already know some of the consequences that come with that lifestyle. We all know it either leads you to being dead or in jail at the end of the day. And while you're out there doing the things that you're doing to get to that bag, you also should know you got to avoid cops, and you got to be well aware and prepared and keep a watchful eye for the jack boys at all times. And although their friend Duncan happened to be an active drug dealer at the time, the Briley brothers were some jack boys at the end of the day. So, it is what it is. Anyway, on March 21st, which would have been 9 days after that first home invasion and arson, they wound up singling out and making entry into another home that was out in the county too. Now this one happened to belong to a 20-year-old dude whom the friend Duncan, he known him as a fellow dealer. So, they all thought and suspected he was holding a large amount of drugs in his house. So they wound up making their way in, tying him up, beating him up real bad, torturing him with all kinds of little household objects, including the clothing iron, trying to get him to talk and come off whatever money and packages that he was holding on to. Now, it's unclear, if they ever got anything out of him, but what has been documented, though, is that they wound up shooting him in the head, killing him and leaving him right there in the house, slumped. Now, March 31st, which would be 10 days after that, the dude Duncan, who was the friend of the brothers, he wound up getting into a heated altercation and drug dispute with another guy named Edric Clark over some money owed to him from another dealer. And Linwood, the oldest brother, he just took it upon himself to shoot the man right on the spot, no questions asked, killing him dead. So, look, if you're keeping track, of the story with me, this is Linwood's third body so far. But it's about to get much crazier than that, though. So 9 more days after that, which would now make it April 9th, the brothers are all together, and they across town, they're cruising around looking for a victim, and they happen to spot this older lady who just happened to be leaving her babysitting job for the evening. So they start trailing the lady's vehicle, and they follow her all the way home, and then follow her right up into her house. And that's where the brothers would savagely beat her, and they would take turns raping her, and then robbing and ransacking her house of all kind of valuables before ultimately shooting her as well.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Turns out the lady was 76 years old.
Hello. This is This call is from a correction facility and is subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using GTL.
Yeah, the lady was 76 years old when they killed her. Now, I'm not exactly sure or clear, on all the way on what actually changed in their agenda from robbing rival drug dealers to robbing old ladies, but something obviously happened. Could it have been the drugs that they was doing at the time? Possibly. Could it have been they was just pure evil with no remorse or regard and no respect for life other than their own? I mean, that's also a possibility too. But it's really nobody left, though, to even tell the story other than Bebe, the youngest brother. And I'm pretty sure from what I know of him, he ain't gonna be doing no talking about it. So I guess that just leaves, a whole lot of room for speculation. But I ain't never here to speculate, though. I just deliver the facts as I know them to be. So, I suppose y'all could do all the speculating you want for your own enjoyment and entertainment purposes. I'm just telling you the story of what went down. So, now here we are, it's like 3 months later, Happens to be the 4th of July, actually. You know, the brothers, they all coming out of their house around Highland Park in the north side of Richmond when they happen to notice this kid who seemed to be like lingering and hanging around Linwood's parked car that's down on the, down by the road on the street, whatever. So, thinking and suspecting that the kid was either trying to break into it or maybe even plotting to steal it, the gang, they wound up surrounding the boy. And as you can probably imagine, the boy is scared shitless at this point. Being confronted by these three niggas whose reputation and thirst for murder is like through the roof. You know what I mean? And it's well known. So, the kid, he tries to take off, make a run for it. But the brothers, they wound up giving chase and they run him down. And they catch the boy, immediately tackle, wrestle him down to the ground while they giving him, the punches and the kicks and all of that. They wound up dragging the boy into a nearby backyard. Now, James Jr. and Bebe, they got the boy pinned down on the ground, okay, and he's laying on his back while they holding him down so he can't get up. Linwood, he happens to find a cement cinder block in the same backyard where they drag him in. So I guess when the boy sees him with the cinder block in his hands, he starts crying out, kicking and screaming, real loud for somebody to come help him. So to shut him up, Linwood walks over and stands right over top of the boy and raises the cinder block in the air as high as his arms could reach, and he drops it on him, completely smashing his head in, killing him instantly. Turns out the boy was only like a 17-year-old kid from the neighborhood, just out and about, walking around that evening. I mean, he just might have been looking for something to break into, who knows, but the fact that he ran into the Briley boys that day, though, that was his fatal and last mistake. But it ain't stopped there, though, So, all right, it's like, let me see, 2.5 months later, about September 14th, the brothers is on the prowl again, and they in search for another victim. Now, they've been rolling around, for hours, unsuccessful all night. They couldn't find nobody until they decided to just park outside this nightclub, out on the south side or whatever. And then they agreed amongst themselves that the first person to come out those doors was going to be their target for the night. Well, it just so happened that this local celebrity DJ at the time, named Johnny G, he happened to be playing the club that night alongside his band. And unfortunately for him, he would be the one to fall right into the hands of the Briley's that night. So as it was said, Johnny G, he decided to step outside to his car for a hot second and take a smoke break between sets. Of course, the gang, they was waiting for him. They saw him, they took notice of him, and they ain't waste no time approaching him. They quickly surrounded him, and assaulted him, roughed him up and all of that, overpowered him, and they wound up throwing the man in the trunk of his own Lincoln Continental. And they drove off with him still in the trunk of his own car to this old broken down and abandoned paper mill on this spot called Mayo Island. Now, if you're not familiar, that's a small little island located in the center of the James River. You got to cross this little bridge on the south side to get over there. But that's where they pulled him from his car, and they robbed him of what little bit of jewelry he had on, and they stripped him butt naked, and then shot him in the head point blank range when he wasn't able to come up with any more money for the trio. They said all he had in his wallet was $6, which the brothers wound up splitting up between the three of them, $2 each. And that's when they dumped his body into the river, where he wouldn't be found for a few more days later. Now, approximately about 2 weeks after that, they on the prowl again, and they spot another old lady leaving work, and they decided to follow her home to an apartment that she happened to live in Richmond. And after catching her off guard, and surrounding her right at the entrance of her apartment, she must have been startled, and she screamed out either in surprise or in terror, because Linwood wound up beating the lady to death with a baseball bat right there on her front doorsteps. The brothers, they then gained entry to her place, dragged the body inside, and proceeded to ransack and search the apartment, taking any and all valuables that they could get their hands on. She happened to be 62 years old. Now, as you can see and understand, these niggas is ruthless. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, it's the type of evil that's just not normal, and you just don't run across shit like this too often. Nowhere. You know what I mean? But, unfortunately, this story is far from over, though. So, 5 days after that, now October 5th. The brothers strike again. This time, it's only 2 blocks away from their very own home in Northside on 4th Avenue. So this 76-year-old woman and her 59-year-old male friend who happened to live with her, they both lived together or whatever, they was both attacked inside the home. Now the lady, she was beaten to a bloody pulp with some kind of hard object that caused her all kinds of blunt force trauma to her head. While the male victim, he got beaten with a baseball bat. Plus he was stabbed numerous times in various places with 5 different knives, a pair of scissors, and a fork. You know what I mean? I guess they was torturing him or something. They said when his body was finally discovered, a couple of knives, the scissors, and the fork were still stuck in his back. And as to be expected, both of them died from their injuries too. Now, as I said earlier, if you're following along with me on the story and paying close attention, keeping count and all that, that's a total of 9 bodies altogether so far. And what's so sad and unfortunate about all this shit is it still ain't over. The body count's still rising. These dudes was actually still roaming the streets at this point and able to still take lives and inflict pain and cause terror. That's what's crazy to me. So anyway, man, the next set of victims, they actually happen to be some longtime friends of theirs. Or maybe they were just acquaintances. I don't know. Either way, what I'm saying is the dude happened to know each one of the brothers for a very long time. It was a guy named Harvey Wilkerson. They all grew up together around Northside, so, they was very familiar with each other. And one thing, too, that I just want to point out is the fact that by this point in their killing spree, it kind of started to seem like it didn't even matter to them much, and they showed little, if any, concern about finding victims and killing in their own backyard. They was terrorizing some of the very same people in their own neighborhoods that knew them well all their lives at this point. So I guess what happens next, I guess it shouldn't even have come as a surprise. So, as it was told to me, exactly 2 weeks later, it's now October 19th, that night, the middle brother, James Jr., he took the lead in leading his brothers on the prowl looking for victims. And their partner, Duncan, who was with him earlier or whatever, he happened to be with him again on this night too. So Harvey, the neighbor, he was living with his then 23-year-old wife, who happened to be 8 months pregnant at the time, and they also had a 5-year-old son together. And they happened to live only a couple houses down from the Brileys. And that night, he happened to be standing in his doorway, watching the street, when he took notice of the brothers outside talking, seemingly pointing in the direction of his house. So, I guess instinctively, he started feeling a little discomfort, and rightfully so. So, he decided to close his front door and lock it up. Well, that was instantly noticed, and recognized by the group. And they decided they was going to walk over to Harvey's porch and knock on the door. At this point, I suppose dude was more worried about the response that would happen if he didn't open the door for the Brileys. So he wound up welcoming them in. Unfortunately for him, all hell would be unleashed on him and his family just for that friendly gesture. So the gang, they quickly came in, and they overpowered the couple in their living room. They immediately bound and gagged them both with duct tape and tied up the little boy. The wife, she was then dragged into the kitchen by Linwood, where she was severely beaten and savagely raped, while all the others watched and listened from the next room. They actually forced their longtime friend Harvey to watch as the group of brothers and their friend Duncan took turns beating and raping his pregnant wife right in front of him and her son. Talking about some fucking savages, man. When they was done with her, they dragged her back to the living room. Then the gang ran through the house, searching for valuables as they usually do. And when they decided they found all there is to find, they wrapped bed sheets around the heads of the victims and told the guy Duncan that he had to kill one of them. So he wound up shooting Harvey in the head, killing him instantly. James Jr., he then shot the man's wife and the son both in the head too, killing them both. Now what's really crazy, about all this is the police was actually already in the general vicinity of that neighborhood when all this was taking place. And they actually heard the shots being fired in real time. They even saw the brothers running down the street at a high speed, and they just weren't able to figure out where the shots had come from. But they did stop them, though, you know what I mean? But it was there was no real grounds for arresting them at that point. You know, the bodies of the victims, they actually didn't even get discovered for a whole 3 days after the fact. You know, and that's when all three of the brothers and Duncan, they got arrested for it. Now check this shit out. During the interrogation process, you know, the DA, he wound up offering the dude Duncan a plea agreement deal. So, in exchange for him turning state's evidence against the Briley brothers, they told Duncan that they wouldn't be seeking the death penalty against him. So he decided to take that deal, you know, and fully cooperate with him. He actually gave him a real detailed play-by-play and rundown of the whole crime spree, starting back from the very beginning. So in exchange for his help and testimony, you know, in prosecuting the brothers, and under the agreement that they made with him, he wound up receiving a life sentence plus 80 years, which in all actuality back then in 1980 would have made him eligible for parole in about 12 to 15 years. On top of all that, though, he was also given a whole new name and identity, and he was housed in an out-of-state prison somewhere far, far away from Virginia, where the Briley brothers would never see him or ever come across him. Ain't that some shit? Well, as far as the three brothers go, you know, of course, they got prosecuted to the fullest extent that the law allows. You know, for Anthony, Bebe, the youngest brother, he wound up being convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and received a life sentence plus 119 years with parole eligibility, though. You know, he wound up avoiding capital murder charges and the death penalty because it couldn't be proven that he personally committed any of the murders himself. You know, because of what they said was his limited role in all the killings. Now, the other brothers, Linwood and James Jr., they both received multiple life sentences for most of the murders during the spree, but they also got several capital murder charges, too, stemming from the abduction and the murder of the DJ, Johnny G, and for the murders of Harvey's pregnant wife and her 5-year-old son, which ultimately, you know, resulted with them getting multiple death sentences as well. So, after being sentenced, you know, they was both sentenced and both sent to be housed on death row at this prison called Mecklenburg State Penitentiary, where they would wind up only spending the next 4 years. Why only 4 years? Well, that's because on May 31st, 1984, Linwood and James Jr., they both became the prime ringleaders of a 6-man team of inmates that decided to use, like, precise and coordinated efforts, you know, to overpower and take over their wing and unit on death row, ultimately allowing them to make an unbelievable and daring escape. You know, I'm talking about some straight-out-the-movies type shit. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, these dudes was like the absolute truth. You know, I'm talking about the real deal. Make no mistake about it. You know, and just to be clear, you know, I'm not glorifying none of the shit they did. Again, I'm just giving y'all the facts. Now, it was said, you know, that during the very early moments, the very beginning of the takeover, both the Briley boys had expressed a strong want and an interest in killing all the captured guards by dousing them with rubbing alcohol and lighting them on fire and watching the pigs burn. That was their exact words. Ironically, though, you know, it was another death row inmate named Willie Lloyd Turner, who himself had been convicted of murder. You know, he stepped up and got in James Jr.'s way, and he didn't allow him to put that plan in effect. But don't you know, though, the state still executed Mr. Turner down the line in May of 1995 by lethal injection. And then another act of heroism during that melee was demonstrated by another death row inmate named Wilbur Evans, who happened to be convicted of killing a city sheriff's deputy in Alexandria, Virginia. You know, he actually stopped Linwood Briley from raping one of the female nurses during all the madness. And, you know, he himself was still executed by the state in October of 1990, despite all kinds of pleas and clemency and testimonies and confirmation statements from numerous guards and staff and their families that said if it wasn't for him, you know, they would have most surely been killed at the hands of the Brileys during that escape. You know, I just thought I'd add that little bit of info in there, you know, just to show that there is some compassion and goodwill left in some folks, even after committing some of the most serious crimes against humanity. You know, a lot of folks probably do deserve a second chance. And in this case specifically, I mean, shit, under the circumstances, I definitely feel like those two guys' sentences could have at least been commuted to life behind bars. You know, but the governor at that time, Douglas Wilder, who also happened to be the very first black governor of the state of VA, he denied all their clemency attempts. A piece of shit. I should probably do a story on his ass soon too, just to kind of expose all the damage he's done in our own communities during his reign as governor. A lot of folks, they tend to think and be under the impression he was a great leader just because he was the first black man in the governor's seat. But he was really a piece of work though. Y'all should really do some research on him. He's actually the one that implemented Project Exile. And if you're from VA, I know you know what I'm talking about. That was the law that gave people 5 years flat federal time for just possessing a firearm, no exceptions. It's a whole lot more though that I ain't even gonna get into right now. I'm gonna definitely speak on it again though at a later date for sure. Let me get back to this wild ass prison break though. So in all, like I said, 6 death row inmates, they wound up escaping that day. So I'm sure you could imagine what kind of high alerts the authorities was on in that very moment. You're talking about a group of 6 stone cold killers, rapists and criminals convicted to the highest degree with absolutely nothing to lose. So the group's initial plan, was to try to make it to Canada. 2 of the escapees, they actually made it as far north as Vermont before they got recaptured. The brothers, they wound up separating from the others in the group though, and they wound up landing in North Philly where they tried to go hide out with one of their uncles. They managed to stay gone, hidden for almost like 3 weeks, but eventually they was relocated, recaptured, on June 19th, due to the coordinated efforts and I guess meticulous surveillance and wiretaps on their uncle's phone, it led the authorities right to him. So a heavily armed squadron of officers and agents, along with the FBI and all the other agencies partnered up, and coordinated to take them. And the brothers were taken into custody once again without incident, and eventually sent back to VA to face their fate. Now, long story short, all their appeals and their clemency attempts, kind of fell short and was ultimately denied. So both Linwood and James Jr. were put to death by the electric chair at the Virginia State Penitentiary in downtown Richmond, better known as the infamous Wall. Now, Linwood, he was killed on October 12th, 1984, which was only like 4 months after they was recaptured. And then his brother James Jr., he was executed on April 18th the following year of 1985. Now, ironically, they both maintained their innocence to the very last moments of life, with Linwood's last words to the spectators watching him were, "I am innocent." While in James Jr., in his final moments, he just looked around at the spectators and asked them twice in a real loud voice, "Are you happy now?" As for Bebe though, to date, all his applications for parole have been denied by the state parole board. And I mean, come on, let's be honest. He'll probably wind up spending the rest of his natural life here behind these walls. Real talk. From what I've seen over the years, and what I know about the Virginia injustice and parole system, it's highly unlikely that he's ever going to see the streets again. Even though it was never proven in court that he ever committed any of the murders himself, just because his last name is a Briley, he ain't gonna never get a fair shake. That's a fact. I mean, I would never tell him that. You know what I mean? Keep hope alive, but seriously, I really doubt that'll ever happen for him. And as far as the friend, Duncan, who snitched on his partners when it was all said and done, he's also still locked up to this very day too. And despite all the recommendations and confirmation statements from the former prosecutors that was on the case, citing and talking about his total cooperation and getting the Brileys convicted, all his parole attempts and applications has also been denied. So at the end of the day, I mean, he did the most unhonorable and disgraceful and disloyal thing a criminal and a friend could ever possibly do. That's turn snitch, and then didn't even get nothing out of it. You know what I mean? Serves him right though, in my opinion. I wish him the most absolute worst luck in life. I hope he died a real slow, painful, agonizing death. That's a fact. Moral to the story, though, well, not really to the story, but to the statements that I just made concerning snitches. I'm still sitting in prison today behind a coward-ass snitch. You understand what I'm saying? A nigga who I consider to be a friend, a partner, a homie, and a brother. I held this dude down on many occasions. Bust my ratchet, put my neck on the line numerous times for this dude. Invited him in my house, had him around my family plenty times. Made a ton of money with him. Held him down when he needed it. Looked out for him when nobody else could. Put him on when nobody else would. Considered this dude to be like a brother from another. And at the end of the day, this nigga pointed his finger at me, man. Tried to put me away for life. All the escape probably would have been a little 10-year bid or some shit that he messed up on, that I ain't even have nothing to do with. Let me reiterate what I just said. I said this nigga tried to put me away for life over a 10-year bid that he would have probably only did like 7 on. And then on top of that, he probably would have looked for me to hold him down and take care of him and his family the whole time. And to be honest, I would have. No questions asked. That's just the type of dude I am. But here we are. The love is just not reciprocated, man. And the niggas you think is keeping it the realest with you, a lot of times could be the absolute fakest with all kinds of hidden agendas. That's what's going on these days, man. Niggas got hidden agendas. Anyways, enough of that. I could sit here and rant for hours on that topic. But I'm happy to be at the very tail end of this bid, though. You know what I mean? It's damn near over, and I still got a great life to look forward to. So my head is in the clouds, my nigga. It's all up from here. So look, you already know, man. Shout out to all my peoples, who've been down with me from the very start and have proven without a shadow of a doubt, what it is between me and you. I ain't gotta name no names for that. Y'all should already know who you are. Shout out to all my partners and comrades still stuck behind these walls too, fighting the good fight and trying to make it home. Shout out to all the good brothers that already made it home. You know what I mean? Still out there fighting the good fight for us all still stuck in here. And as always, lads, man, shout out to you too, man. You already know what it is. But shout out to all your listeners, and your viewers and followers too. Because if it wasn't for y'all, I probably wouldn't even be doing this shit for real. Now don't forget to check out my podcast, Truth Beyond These Walls. It's available on every major music streaming platform. And holler at me on the gram too at Truth Beyond These Walls. Also, if you haven't yet or you still would like to, you could also donate or make a contribution, of $1 on Cash App to the Truth Parker Fund. All one word, no spaces. I most certainly appreciate each and every person that's already taken the time to show me some love, whether that was sending me something to the app, leaving a comment on my stories, or just sending me an email or message directly. You know what I mean? Keep it coming. Anyway, y'all, this your man, Truth Parker, man. Big OAP representative, Black Mob Boss Ties, you already know. Jersey to VA all day. I'll let your motherfucking boy, man. One.
Escape disorder, asylum is what they seek. Yet this economy's weak. Like John Gotti said, the money's out on the street. You need the heart of Balboa, the eye of the tiger.
Hey yo, make sure you check that Rare Air Chief Cherokee featuring Brav the God on Spotify.
Coming up, right? I was in the streets, of course. I was getting money. I was in the streets. I was selling drugs, was doing all that. I'm saying that was, that's how I was making money. So, with selling drugs, comes beef. Now I'm gonna give you a good story. Actually, I don't think I ever told this story.
Hey yo, LAZ, I done told y'all before, they calling this book The Hood Game of Thrones, you heard? It's called The Blood Sagas by Avery Brown. Shout out to the bro, Brooklyn in the building. The bro got major people reading this book and major things about to take place with this book. Make sure you on the right side of history, you heard? LAZ.
This is a warning. Some episodes on this channel may be disturbing to some. We mean no disrespect to anybody who was closely related to or loved some of the victims in some of these stories. We're just documenting true street history.
Now, both Turkey and her baby dad was crack users. You know what I mean? They would allow dudes sometimes to sell drugs out their apartment. Not only that, but she was also an outstanding chef. And when I say chef, I ain't talking about baking or frying or cooking no food. You know what I mean? I'm talking about this chick was like the best crack cooking chef in the whole Jackson Ward projects. And everybody would bring their work to her, you know, for her to do the magic, cook it up for them, stretch it and all of that. You know, and then of course, dudes, you know, they would hit her off with a little something for her services. So anyway, the nigga Pop, you know what I mean, he used to use her to cook his shit up. And then he would be selling out her apartment from time to time. You ready? All right.
Yes, sir.
Alright, so before I get started, you know, I just want to take a second to thank everybody that donated to my Fresh Start initiative. You know what I mean? That shit means more to me than you're probably even aware of right now. You know, and I'm more than appreciative for every single dollar that's come in and for everyone that decided to make a contribution. You know, it definitely shows me how much y'all support a nigga trying to do the right thing on the comeback. And just so y'all know, you know, I'm going to continue to keep it open until I'm finally released. So if you haven't had a chance yet or, you know, want to continue to show support, please feel free to do so. Everything counts and every little bit helps. You know, all I'm asking for is a single dollar if you got it to spare. So hit up the Cash App, Truth Parker Fund, all one word, no spaces. I'll let your boy. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go into this little story, man, about one of the most brazen and heinous, notorious, wildest, most violent events that ever took place in Richmond, Virginia history. This was in the mid-90s, you know what I mean, right around the time that I actually started coming out there regularly. I know a lot of folks is going to remember this because, you know, it was extremely high profile and really sad, to be honest. And not to mention, you know, it was committed by a dude who was also a native New Yorker, you know, from Flatbush, Brooklyn, actually. Who also, he came out to Richmond in the early 90s, you know, hustling, trying to get some money just like the rest of us at that time. You know, this happened to actually be, this was actually a local election year, too, for the governor's seat. And I'm only mentioning that because, you know, just like most other places, I'm sure, when those local races is in play, you know, that tough on crime act seems to go into effect extra heavy. And I think in this case, you know, even though it was super brutal and super high profile, it was kind of used as an example, you know, for the rest of us out there to imply that, you know, this is what we do to out-of-towners who come out to VA and commit these type of crimes. And I say that because dude wound up getting the death penalty. Now, make no mistake about it, you know, if there ever was a crime that deserved the death penalty, oh, this was it, without a doubt. You know, and I always talk about how it was out here for dudes from up top. And, you know, just as I mentioned before, this was the era where Richmond, VA was like at the very, very top of the list nationwide for the most murders per capita. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, niggas was getting bodied out there left and right around this time. That's a fact. And I'm sure, you know, if you just want to do a little fact checking or whatever, hit the Google search up from the years like 93 through 98, 99, you'll see that Richmond continuously had one of the highest murder rates of any city in America at that time. And that's crazy as hell, you know, when you think about it, because, you know, Richmond is a small city for real, especially when you compare it to places like Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, Philly, Houston, Newark, where I'm from, or any one of the 5 boroughs in New York City. You understand what I'm saying? It's a lot different now, though. What I mean is, you know, the murder rate has dropped tremendously over the years. Make no mistake about it. You know, I've been going a long time, but I still watch the news faithfully. Just about every day, you know, I still see bodies dropping on the regular, left and right out there. Some of the most recent headlines, which I've probably seen, though, I'm sure because it's been broadcasted all across the nation, with the shit like the high school graduation turning deadly into a shootout. But his high schooler, you know, just minutes after walking the stage getting his diploma, got murdered right in front of his pops, actually right with his pops, with his cap and gown still on, along with 5 others that was in attendance that got shot and wounded. You know, and that shit just happened a few months ago. And then out there too, in Newport News, you had this little 5-year-old first grader shoot his teacher in the chest, you know, right there in the classroom in front of all the other kids in there. She lucky to still be alive. You understand what I'm saying? And I mean, the list goes on and on, man. I could go on for days about shit like that. The point I'm trying to make is, you know, besides the murderous and treacherous 90s that really put Richmond and other parts of VA on the map, shit still be jumping off to this day, you know. I suppose, though, the fact that the bigger cities like Chicago and Baltimore and the other places that I mentioned, you know, they really taking those numbers to new heights, though, you know, and they kind of surpassed the rates from which we thought was crazy high back in the day. You know, now the rates are just astronomical and through the roof, you know what I mean? And I can really only assume it's just going to get worse and worse before it gets any better. But anyway, man, this particular event that I'm referring to happened to jump off in 1994 in a housing project in Jackson Ward called Gilpin Court. Now, if you're unfamiliar, Jackson Ward, it happened to be the biggest project in Richmond. You know, probably the biggest project in the whole state of VA, to be honest. You know, I used to travel straight down Chamberlain Ave, where I used to do all my hustling at the time, all the way to where it changes over to Belvedere Street, and then veer off to my left, you know, and I could pull right into the backside of Gilpin Court and travel all the way through it, you know, onto the rest of Jackson Ward. I'm talking about no more than like 10 minutes away from where I had my spot set up. And it was a dude out there named Christopher Goins, you know, and like I mentioned earlier, dude was from Brooklyn originally. You know, he was probably about 20 years old at the time, you know, only like a year or so older than me. And he was out there in Gilpin Court, you know, getting his little hustling on, slinging crack. That's where he chose to set up shop at. You know, and he would travel back up to New York, you know, get his work and bring it back down to VA, cook it up, hit the block, serve fiends out there, you know, on some hand-to-hand shit. So he really wasn't no big money kingpin type dude and nothing like that, but you know, anybody that's familiar with the game know, you know, back then you could break down a couple ounces and make a nice profit for yourself, you know, especially dealing with 20s and dimes and shit like that. So that's basically what he was doing. Now, anybody that knew Chris, you know, called him Pop. That's just what he went by, you know, what he liked to be called. So for the sake of the story, that's what I'm going to use. And out of respect for all his victims and survivors, I ain't gonna mention none of their names either if I can help it, you know, because the story's about to get real crazy in a minute. So anyway, you know, Pops was a cool nigga for the most part, you know what I mean? He didn't really make a whole lot of enemies like that. He wasn't really with all the rah-rah shit and the smoke and all of that either. You know, although a lot of the dudes that was around him at the time was, you know, and they was all the way with the shit, you know, at all times, for real. So it was really surprising to me, you know, to hear about and find out all the circumstances of what actually took place with him and what transpired and went down. And even though, you know, a whole lot of stories and accusations and lies came out during and after the fact, I could really only assume that the only people that truly know for a fact what went down is the people that was actually there. And unfortunately, you know, most of all of them is dead. But I'm going to get to that in a second, though. So, just to be clear, you know, I'm stating the fact that this picture I'm about to paint for y'all is mostly from one of the survivors' descriptions and testimonies, really, of what actually took place in that small apartment that day when shit went left. And when I say went left, I'm talking all the way left field on some foul, barbaric type shit. You know what I mean? On the real, man, this ain't even really the type of story I like telling or talking about, you know, but it's definitely a part of Virginia crime history. So, you know, being the hood journalist and documentarian I am, I'm going to go ahead and bring this shit to you, lads, because ain't nobody else going to be able to get this type of shit out of me but you. That's real talk. So, as I said, you know, Pop was a crack dealer in the project. And for the most part, you know, he was getting all his work from up top. And he would bring it down, he'd cook it up, he'd hit the block, turn around, do it all over again. You know, much like most of us up top dudes was doing in the city at that time. And he actually used to ride the Amtrak and the Greyhound to do his trafficking. And he wound up actually catching the case one time, stepping off the train. Very much like the story that I told you before about my guy Batman from Queensbridge. You know, personally, I ain't never really liked that public transportation shit. You know, I always felt a lot safer traveling in my own vehicle, hitting the highway. But, you know, for what it's worth, a lot of niggas rode them trains and buses at that time. Pop happened to be one of them. So yeah, you know, he wound up getting bagged up with a couple ounces. You know, they locked him up, gave him a bail. He paid for it, and he was back out in the projects doing his thing all over again, just like nothing ever happened. What's crazy is, he would never actually get to face any of those charges in court because, of what would transpire a few months later. So the short story, the short version of the story is, Pops did some wild ass crazy shit, right? He wound up going on the run for it, fleeing back to New York. And his face was shown on America's Most Wanted or whatever. And he wound up getting caught in Brooklyn. And he ended up, being sent back to VA and fighting his case. They was pushing for the death penalty. And then he ultimately lost his case, and sat on death row. And then he got executed by the state a few years later. That's basically the gist of it all. But you already know I'm going to break it all down so you can really get a better understanding of everything that took place. So there was this chick, out there in the projects who we all call Turkey. And Turkey, she had a whole family of little kids. 3 daughters, 2 sons, all ranging in the ages from 14 down to 18 months. And then she had a baby daddy too, and they all was living in a little apartment together in Gilpin Court. Now, both Turkey and her baby dad was crack users, you know what I mean? And they would allow dudes sometimes to sell drugs out their apartment. Not only that, but she was also an outstanding chef. And when I say chef, I ain't talking about baking or frying or cooking no food. You know what I mean? I'm talking about this chick was like the best crack cooking chef in the whole Jackson Ward projects. And everybody would bring their work to her, for her to do the magic, cook it up for them, stretch it, and all of that. And then of course, dudes, they would hit her off with a little something for her services. So anyway, the nigga Pop, he used to use her to cook his shit up. And then he would be selling out her apartment from time to time. Now mind you, all of this would be going on while these little kids is running all through the house, running all around the spot every day, all day. Now, Turkey's oldest daughter, who happened to be 14 at the time, and was probably a little too grown for her age. And what I mean by that is, she had likely seen and done and experienced quite a bit at her age, given the type of environment that she was growing up in. I won't really speak on her personal life in that aspect, but I said all that to say she was already out there having sex with grown-ass men. You understand what I'm saying? And she actually wound up getting pregnant by Pop. Now, Pop, on the other hand, he already had another girlfriend that he was dealing with, and he ain't really seemed to be too happy about little shorty girl getting pregnant by him. So that kind of became an issue down the line. And according to the news and the testimonies and all the he say, she say that was out there at the time, it was implied that ultimately that was the reason why he flipped out and then blacked out on the whole family. Now, before I get to that though, let me just say this too, because this wasn't part of any of the news stories or the evidence that ever came out, but I truly feel it probably played a big part in what really happened that day and some of the reasoning behind it. So like I said, the chick Turkey, she was a mean chef, right? And a lot of people would use her. And if like I know, crackheads, they could sometimes be geniuses when they come to getting their fix or their next hit. And Turkey wasn't no exception to that. Let me explain what I mean. So, when you're cooking crack, a lot of times, the whole purpose and process is to stretch the coke, and make more than what you originally had without losing too much of the potency. And a lot of times, there'd be extra residue or whatever left over in the pots. And if you had a crackhead cooking for you, which wasn't uncommon, by the way, they would come up with all kind of ways to try to leave something behind in the pots that wasn't real noticeable to the untrained eye, and then go behind themselves and scrape it out the pot, whenever you left or went on about your business. Basically get a free high, on some real slick shit. Well, what I had learned about Turkey was she had this way of cooking up on the stove.
You have 1 minute remaining.
It's about to get good, man. I'm gonna just call you right back.
I bet.
All right.
Thank you for using GTL.
Alright. So yeah, what I had learned about Turkey was she had this way of cooking up on the stove and then transferring the pot over to the sink. And however she would be working it or whipping it up or whatever, she would make some of the coke drop down the drain in the sink and into this little glass mayonnaise jar that she had fitted onto a little drainage pipe somehow underneath the cabinet. You know, whoever she happened to be cooking for at the time, they wouldn't even know or realize that she was catching a few extra grams on the slide. You know, and this would be on top of what dudes would be paying her for her services. So really and truly, you know, she was coming off almost every time she cooked. And niggas ain't even know it. Now, it was said, you know, documented in like various news outlets that on this particular day when all the madness jumped off, that Pop wound up going over to the apartment with one of his partners. You know, and somehow or another, he was showing a picture of the unborn fetus in Shorty Girl's belly. And he just lost it and blacked out. You know, and a lot of the testimony during this trial kind of painted that picture too. But, you know, I always suspected that it was probably a little more to it than that, because it was also said, you know, just it wasn't documented that on this particular day, Pop and his homeboy, they caught Turkey trying to be slick with the coke. You know, it's the coke in the sink trick. And along with all the underlying tension that they already had, you know, concerning him knocking up her 14-year-old daughter, who now happened to be 7 months pregnant, I think that was really what drove him over the edge to do the wild, crazy, stupid-ass shit he did. You know, that's just my opinion, though. But what happened next would turn into, like, a massive, violent, bloody massacre murder scene, you know, that would spiral way out of control. So, as the story goes, you know, Pop started exchanging words with Turkey in the kitchen. Now, mind you, the whole family is in the house at this time. You know, the kids is running around and shit like that. And it's Pop and his homeboy in there arguing with Turkey. You know, all of a sudden, shots start ringing off and popping off. Turkey gets shot 4 times, twice in the head, and she dies instantly right there in the kitchen. Then, you know, the baby daddy, he's killed right there in the hallway adjacent to the kitchen with 9 shots. He also caught 2 in the head, 3 in the chest, and the rest was in his arms and legs while he was laying there on the floor. And then for whatever reasons, you know, they decided to turn the gun on to all the little kids in the house. So then Turkey's little 9-year-old daughter, she wound up getting shot 3 times. Once through the heart, once through her lung, and then once in her head at close range. And her little 4-year-old son, he shot once in the head too, at real close range. And then the smaller and younger 3-year-old boy, he shot twice in his head same way. Then it was said that next, you know, Pop went to the back bedroom where the 7-month pregnant 14-year-old girl was with her 18-month-old sister and proceeded to shoot her 9 times. 3 of those shots went directly in her belly, you know what I'm saying, once in her neck, and the rest was in her arms and legs while she tried to shield the baby sister from getting shot. But the 18-month-old got hit anyway. You know, fortunately, it was only in the wrist and the arm, though, so I guess Shorty did a good job kind of covering her up the best way she could. Basically, everybody in that family, though, was executed and left for dead that day. You know, but ultimately, by a stroke of God's hands, the pregnant girl, she only played dead, you know, but she wound up surviving, along with her little baby sister that she shielded with her body. You know, and once she was convinced that Pop and his friend had left the house, that's when she managed to go call 911 for help. And, you know, when she finally made it to the hospital and through surgery and all that, it was determined that one of those shots into her belly went directly through the unborn fetus's face. You know, and she wound up losing her baby too. Now, I ain't really got no words, you know, for that kind of violence. You understand what I'm saying? I done did some wild ass shit myself to some deserving niggas before, but never have I put my hands on or turned my gun on no kids. You know what I mean? That shit is just totally uncalled for. I can't even begin to fathom any types of circumstances or situations where I'd be able to justify taking the lives of some small children, even by accident. You know what I mean? That shit is just a complete and ultimate no-no in my book. But that's just me, though. You know? Anyway, man, the nigga Pop, he went off on the run after that. Like I said, ultimately landed on America's Most Wanted. You know, he was able to duck out and hide for probably about 2 months, you know, before he was captured back in Brooklyn along with his girlfriend. And then through the course of the investigation, the murders, it was determined that all of the shots that was fired that day in the apartment, they all came from the same 45 caliber Glock. You know, when investigators, they was able to match the bullet fragments and all that in the casings to the same bullet cartridges that was found in Pop's girlfriend's apartment and in their possession when they got caught. You know, along within the car that they was driving and had escaped in too. Now, obviously, you know, the 14-year-old that survived, she was able to give some detailed eyewitness testimony for the prosecution during the trial phase, you know, along with some other evidence that was presented too, but I ain't even gonna get into all of that right now. Overall, you know, Pop was charged with capital murder for killing the 3-year-old, and then he got 4 first-degree murders for the rest of the family. You know, 2 malicious woundings and attempted murders for the 2 that survived, and then 7 counts of gun charges stemming from using a firearm in the commission of a felony. And, you know, although he tried to put up a fight, and trust and believe, this nigga tried any and everything he could to possibly make a defense beyond a reasonable doubt. He even went as far as to point his finger at his homeboy, you know, that was with him that day. So that's a whole nother story, though. He ultimately wound up being found guilty of everything. You know, and during his sentencing, he received the death penalty for the capital murder and 4 life sentences for the other murders, and then 70+ years for the malicious woundings and the firearm charges. And then, you know, after all this clemency attempts and appeals was exhausted and turned down in the courts, the state of Virginia executed him by lethal injection in December of 2000. And you know what's crazy is, when it was all said and done, the little shorty girl who survived getting shot 9 times and losing her baby, she was sitting right there watching Pop as he took his last breaths on that prison gurney. How ironic was that? Anyway, man, this is a sad but, you know, really true story, unfortunately, and that shit rocked Jackson Ward and the whole Richmond city itself to the core when it happened. You know, I could actually remember certain hardcore street criminal gangster niggas on some vigilante type shit, you know, claiming to be looking for Pop, saying what they was gonna do to him if they caught up with him in retaliation for killing all those kids. You know, niggas was really out and about on the prowl. And I'm more than sure, you know, had he not made it out the city and then finally got apprehended, that somebody was gonna do him dirty, you know, and serve him street justice. I'm more than sure of that. So as it turns out, you know, his girlfriend that he got caught with, she also wound up getting like 8 or 9 years too, behind helping him get away, and then some other shit that was tied to the case. And then his partner that was with him at the time of the killings, he actually wound up having all his charges dropped. But he also wound up getting shot in his head too shortly after the trial was over. You know, he survived though, but he's fucked up for life. And in all honesty, you know, I don't even know if that was for retaliation for being with Pop when all the shit went down, as if he was like an accomplice or participant or whatever, or simply for the fact that he testified against Pop, because they actually wound up pointing the fingers at each other during the trial. Either way, man, I guess it was just some form of karma, you know. But that's all I'm gonna say about that, though. Rest in peace to all them kids, you know, that lost their lives that day, because they ain't deserve that shit, by no means. So, at the end of the day, man, I think the moral here has got to be something to the effect of no women, no kids. You know what I mean? Scarface said that shit best. You gotta have some kind of morals and code about yourself when you out here doing that dirt, man. Especially when it comes to putting down the murder game. You know, shit like this is just totally unjustified, uncalled for, and unacceptable, no matter how you look at it. You know, it's hard for me to even try and figure out where a nigga head was at in that moment. You know, or to even believe that a nigga heart is just that cold or that frozen. You know, that shit is ridiculous. And beyond that, you know, just know that karma is real, man. The things we do in the dark, they will almost always come to the light. That's a fact. Ain't no way to pick and choose how that karma gonna get reciprocated back to you when that time comes either. So just be aware of that. So when you out here being a snake, doing folks dirty and all that, thinking you're getting away with something, yeah, you know, you might get away with it right now for the time being, but rest assured something will definitely come back around and bite you dead in your ass. No homo. Trust and believe it ain't gonna feel good either. You ain't gonna like it one bit. That's real talk. Anyway, man, you already know. Shout out to you, Laz. You know, like I said earlier, man, I ain't even really want to do this type of story, but I figured if it needed to be told, then I may as well bring it to you, because ain't nobody else gonna get this shit from nowhere else. That's a fact. You already know how we get down, my brother. Shout out to all the real street guys out there too, that got morals and got values and still play the game with principles and integrity. You know, we cut from a different cloth, man. They just don't make that kind of fabric and material no more. You know, this shit is vintage and hard to come by. So big up yourselves, you know. You already know who you are. Don't forget to tune into my podcast, Truth Beyond These Walls. It's on every single music streaming platform out there. And holler at me on the gram at Truth Beyond These Walls. And if you haven't already, you know, don't forget to donate $1 on Cash App to Truth Parker Fund. All one word, no spaces. I know y'all see it on the screen. It's your man Truth though, man. Jersey to VA all day. Brick City to the Rich City. You already know how I do. I'll let your motherfucking boy. One.